G'day, my name's Grant Dixon and this is another video that I've been waiting for a while to actually make because I've been waiting for some key data to arrive, and today it arrived, and thus this video. So to start, let's share my screen. Okay, so in this video, as my previous videos, I'm drawing on two bits of data from the Ministry of Health. The first one is the daily reports of cases, which are shown on the screen here. And the other one is vaccinated people details, which are shown on the screen here. And you can see it talks about all the people who are eligible, 4 million or so here, 96.3%, and so on. And down the bottom it talks about the number of 5 to 11-year-olds who are also being vaccinated. And all those figures I compute to give me the results we're going to discuss now. So let's move to the first graph. We're going to talk about COVID first of all, who's getting COVID and how many. Now this graph basically I've been plotting since about October last year, and you can see that the number of unvaccinated people in red have been steadily falling and crossed over, and today is extremely low, about 5%, whereas those who are fully vaccinated are in green here, and that's about 95% of the people, and all vaccinated, including those who only got a single dose, about 96% vaccinated. And down here in the purple is the boosted, and as you can see they are rapidly coming up too, and I think they're about 40% now. So that's how it's been running since day one. This is each day the numbers are recorded and it's a running total, so to speak. This graph is a little bit different because here I'm looking at the trend. And on this left-hand side of the graph, I've been looking at 3 to 4 weekly records, and on the right-hand side of the graph, I narrowed it down to 2 weekly. So as you can see, way back in November 2021, there was a crossover of cases. This is a weekly causes now. We're talking about trends, crossed over in mid-November, and the unvaccinated people who are getting COVID went to rock bottom and stayed there, and it's about 5% or less all the way through since about February this year, all the way through to today. And at the same time, the number of people who are fully dosed or partially dosed went sky high and stayed sky high, and around about 95%. And down here we have the number of boosted people, which has been steadily rising ever since the Ministry of Health started records around 24th of February this year. And has started off around 20% and is now up to around 40%, approaching, in fact, very close to 50%. These are just trend numbers. So you take a week at a time and you plot the graph, and this is the trend you see. So the question is, how do they look when you look at cases per 100,000? 100,000 is the gold standard, so to speak, as far as working out who's getting COVID and who isn't. And you can see in this graph here that the unvaccinated rate per 100,000 started off very low, rose somewhat and came down again here, and it's around about 1,000 per 100,000. However, the number of double vaccinated and boosted per 100,000 has screamed up to about 5,500 and now is tailing off as this current outbreak is also tailing off. And you can see also that the boosted people also went up quite high to about 3,500 and is tailing off a little bit. And they imply that the two will cross over or meet at some stage in the future. But as far as case per 100 goes, those who are unvaccinated are way better off than those who are vaccinated or boosted. As you can see, the rates are completely different. Now, another way of looking at that is to look at the actual data source. You can see these are the data plots that I've been doing since the 2nd of February all the way through to the 31st of March, yesterday. And you can see down the bottom here, let me just bring that up a bit bigger, and you can see that the unvaccinated rates down here is 1,000 people per 100,000, whereas the all dosed rates is 3,911 per 100,000, and the second dosed and boosted rates is 3,906 per 100,000, and the boosted rates are 3,213 per 100,000. So you can see that 1,000 is a third. So this is the difference here. There are 3.91 more chances of getting COVID if you're vaccinated in some way. Same thing if you're double vaccinated or boosted. And if you're just boosted, in other words, got all the shots required, you're still 3.21 more likely of getting COVID than an unvaccinated person. So it's over 3 times more if you're boosted and almost 4 times more if you're double vaccinated or vaccinated at all. Chances of getting COVID more than those who have not been vaccinated. And that's quite clear that vaccination causes you to be more vulnerable to COVID, to gaining COVID as a sickness. You're 3 to 4 times more likely to get COVID if you're vaccinated than those who are unvaccinated. The proof is quite clear here. There's no doubt about that. How did I work out my sums? Well, just to give a basis of how I worked out my sums, I've gained the number of people vaccinated from the Ministry of Health. You can see up here there's 12 plus 4,055,392. And then also from the same source, I've got the number of 5 to 11 year olds, 257,027. I worked out as a result the number of not vaccinated people here, 155,000 for plus 12, and about 218,000 or 219,000 for those who are between 5 and 11. And then from Strats New Zealand, I got the number of 0 to 5 year olds, which is 368,540. And then taking all that away from this number down the bottom here, which is the number of estimated number of people in New Zealand on the 17th of February 2022, you get a number of 71,477 uncounted people. Now, I guess these are people that have escaped the Ministry of Health catchment, so to speak. There are people in New Zealand for sure, they just don't get into the stats. And we need to add them in as unvaccinated because they are unvaccinated. And if you add up what these 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of unvaccinated people, you get a number of 814,781 people, which equals about 16% of New Zealanders. Now that's way more than the 3 or 4% that the Prime Minister keeps on parroting out as being insignificant. There's a lot more significance to it. In fact, 4 times the number that she says, 16% of unvaccinated people in New Zealand. And that's the number I've used for the unvaccinated people, is to give a more realistic and accurate number of people. And the false news is actually from the government, not from people like myself. So what about hospitalisations? This graph looks at hospitalisations since the 16th of August 2021. And as you can see, hospitalisations were very high among the unvaccinated initially. That's going back to October 2021. And they stayed high all the way through to about the 14th of February, about mid-February, when they literally dived straight down and went down to about 25% of the numbers of people in hospital. Whereas the vaccinated people in the brown here, or those who are double vaccinated people in the green here, both shot up from about mid-February to about 70 or 80% today. And at the same time, the boosted started off quite low in actual fact, around 4 or 5% of those in hospital, but it's now up to about 28%, I guess, in absolute numbers. Now this is just the numbers on a day-by-day count since day one. And just by the way, this drop-off, sudden drop-off in unvaccinated and sudden rise in vaccinated counts when the BA2 variant grew strongly in New Zealand. The BA1 variant was over here somewhere in around February. It came in, but it didn't seem to affect numbers. But what did affect numbers was the BA2 variant, which obviously the vaccinated have no immunity from, because they went up very, very strongly in numbers. So this is the absolute running total numbers for hospitalisation. But again, what about weekly numbers? And again, in this graph on the left-hand side, I took the numbers on a 3 to 4 weekly basis, and on the right-hand side, I've taken it on a weekly basis. So every week, I've worked out what the rise for that week has been. So we're not counting the numbers way back in August last year. We're just counting the numbers in the last week to give a much more accurate run of what the numbers are doing. And as you can see, we've got a crossover here. It's again in February when BA2 took hold. For some reason, there was a dropout of unvaccinated infections later in February. I don't know what that's about. I only can assume that something changed in the way that the Ministry of Health recorded numbers that day, and it just caused that wild peak, which is just an aberration, which I think we can just ignore. Anyway, so if you look at the trend, there's a slow rise in all dosed COVID hospitalisations, and at the same time a slow rise in the double dosed and boosted hospitalisations in the green here since mid-February this year to today. That rise will continue to grow, and as you can see, it's up here in the high 80s, quite a high figure, 80% that is. And also you can notice that the boosted have sharply coming up, particularly more recently, to approaching 50%, or in the high 40s or mid 40% at the same time in hospital. And at the same time, the unvaccinated proportions have come down to about 12%, 15% of the total number. So these are the trends, and the trend is the unvaccinated people are going to hospital less and less. The partially or fully vaccinated people are pretty much the total number of people in hospital, and the boosters are coming up quite rapidly, catching up, and will eventually approach the partially vaccinated, I'm sure. So the question is, what's happening as far as the cases per 100,000? Because again, the cases per 100,000 is the critical gold standard, so to speak. And again, on this graph, you can see on the left, I recorded 3 or 4 weekly per 100,000, and on the right, I've recorded it weekly. Now, the graph's going up and down quite a lot, but if you look at the trends, you'll get a good feel for what's happening. And again, since mid-February, there's been a steep rise in the number of partially vaccinated people getting hospitalisation, whereas the unvaccinated also rose steeply and then tailed off, and has now been quite steeply declining in numbers. At the same time, the boosted have been skyrocketing up high. And the reason I made this video today is quite clear on this graph. Hopefully you've seen it already. It's over here on the right in this red circle. Today, the number of boosted people is greater than the number of unvaccinated people in hospital. And this is per 100,000, and this is accurate, and these are according to the numbers that I've explained to you before of the 16% unvaccinated people in New Zealand. And this is the truth that the government should be telling you, that the vaccinations, I hate to say it, but the vaccinations are next to useless. Because even in hospitalisation, the number of boosted people, as well as the people who are double vaccinated or partially vaccinated, but the number of boosted people, which is the gold standard, have now today risen higher than the number of unvaccinated people in hospital. And I'm quite confident this number will continue to rise. These zigzags will continue to zigzag. The unvaccinated may rise up again, but eventually the boosted will pull away quite clear of the unvaccinated. In actual fact, the boosted will match with the partially vaccinated, because in effect, there is no value for being boosted or partially vaccinated, and they will end up here somewhere, whereas the unvaccinated will end up down here somewhere in a few weeks or maybe a month or so. So this is hot news, and you need to go and tell people that the boosted are more likely now, as of today, that the boosted are more likely to be in hospital than the unvaccinated. It's not what you hear from the government. It's not what you hear from their misinformation. This is the truth. This is the honesty. You can do the sums yourself. The sums are being worked out from government-provided data. It's all open source. Work out these sums. The boosted are now more hospitalised than the unvaccinated. And I think this is something we should all realise, and realise that this whole vaccination program has been a great, great problem. And when you think about the damages it's caused to people's health, it's a big problem that we just can't get out of now. This is the truth, that the boosted are not doing as well as the unvaccinated when it comes to hospitalisation. So in conclusion, my thoughts are, who are the most dangerous people, the vaccinated or the unvaccinated? I'm thinking of the hospitals with doctors and nurses who have been stood down because they're unvaccinated, but my figures show that the vaccinated are more dangerous than the unvaccinated. So maybe the legislation should mandate the vaccinated to be stood down. The vaccinated are 3 to 4 times more likely of getting COVID, and are actually more likely now to be in hospital as a patient. It's the vaccinated who are dangerous, not the unvaccinated, and the government needs to get its head around that. Thank you. Bye.